This is part 8 of the Craftsman Emerson Gen 2 Drill Press Rebuild series. If you haven't seen part 7, click the link at the top of the screen. In this video, we will be cleaning and polishing the column, and then we will be cleaning up a couple of the other parts. Hello everyone, I'm Jeff and welcome to my shop. We got a lot to cover, so let's get to it. Not everyone has all of the tools that I've got, and there are plenty of people that have got a lot more tools than I have. But this is something that anybody can do if you've got the time, the energy, and the space to work on it. Basically, I'm putting together what's called a poor man's lathe. I've got a long piece of threaded rod. You can get that at your big box stores. And then I've got a wooden, I think it's a chair leg from Home Depot on one end and on the other end. And basically, I just drilled out the centers of those wooden legs or furniture legs so that they would slide onto that threaded rod. And then I've got a washer and two nuts on one end, and we're going to have a washer and two nuts on the other end. And then we take that column, once we've got all that inserted in it, and set it on 4 casters that you can get at Home Depot that I've got mounted to a little piece of plywood. And then I've got a couple of 2x4s that are screwed together and make kind of a rectangle down at one end. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to screw all of that stuff down to my workbench so it doesn't move around. And then we're going to use a hand drill. And this is a hand drill that I got from Harbor Freight years ago. This is really the only thing I use it for. But probably any hand drill would work as long as you can lock it in the on position. And we just chuck that threaded rod into the chuck. Now, it makes it easier if you kind of strip all the threading off of the part that's going to go inside that chuck. Otherwise, it tries to work its way out while it's rotating. But then after we've got everything screwed down and we've got the threaded rod chucked inside the drill, we should be able to turn this on. And if we've got everything kind of balanced out, and you might have to work with moving the drill around a little bit up and down and so on and so forth until everything kind of spins on there nicely balanced. So I forgot to set the camera to record when I started the dry sanding, and you're only catching the last part of it. But basically, I'm using an orbital sander here. And I started with 100 grit, and I went 100, 120, 180, 220, and then 320. And basically, I go all the way down, and then I come all the way back up with each one of those grits. And this is what the column looks like at that point. And it's got a nice satin finish to it, so if you don't want to polish your column, this would be a good place to stop. I've got some pitting going on there, and I was just looking at it a little better. The next stage is wet sanding if you're going to polish. So I'm wetting the column down, and then I'm starting with 320 grit, and I'm just going to go down about 10 inches, and then I'll re-wet the sandpaper and continue. And I'll do that all the way down and then all the way back. And we're going to watch this process in its entirety, and then the footage will speed up for the other grits. But basically, we're going to go 320, 400, 600, 800, and 1,000 grit. All the way down and all the way back. And we're going to rinse the column off between each grit. I mentioned this in a previous video, but whenever you're wet sanding, the 2 things you want to keep in mind are, 1, keep everything wet. That's why we're only going 10 inches, and then we re-wet the sandpaper. And 2, you've got to rinse between each grit. If you don't rinse between each grit, then you're defeating the purpose of the wet sanding. And as with all sanding, the purpose is to remove the scratches from the previous grit as you sand. So we'll do this all the way down, and then we'll come all the way back with the 320. and it gets messy. I'm actually wearing a face mask because when this is all said and done, my arms will be all black and I'll have that stuff slung all over me. And there's a lot to be said, I guess, about technique or whatever. I try to vary where that 10 to 12 inches is where I re-wet the sandpaper. And you can see some lines forming on the column where the column is balanced on those casters. But that's not a problem. That'll be, once we've pulled the column back off of this and polished it and wiped it down and everything, you won't even see where the casters were. But there's, I've got a lot of stuff that I could use to make a much more effective rig to do this. But I've kept doing it this way in all of these videos that I've done, just so you guys can do this on your own. This isn't anything difficult or crazy. I guess the only thing dangerous about it, is if you were to get the sandpaper or the rag when you clean the column off, wedged between the column and those casters. So you just need to be careful when you're going over the casters. But other than that, I've had the rag snagged out of my hands a couple times. It's not the end of the world. And that drill's not going fast enough to really sling that column anywhere crazy. And every once in a while you just retighten down that chuck because it'll work its way loose. So that's the wet sanding, and we're just going to speed the footage up here and let it play through the rest of the grits. Again, we're doing 320 and then 400, 600, 800, and then 1,000. You can go all the way up to 3,000 grit if you want, but 1,000 grit is plenty enough for what we're going to do. So in some of my other videos, you might see me start off with the angle grinder and a flap wheel or one of the 3M pads on the angle grinder working on the column. And that's because those columns, they're not as in good of condition as this column is in. And it's going to take something more than the 100 grit to really get them down to bare metal and have a nice finish on them. And the weird thing about this column, and I've done so many of these drill presses, and I've done this so many times with columns, this is the first time that I've really noticed it on a column. And you'll probably see it once we get to the polishing phase, but this column has this weird, like 1-inch spiral all the way down it, where when they, I don't know if they cold rolled the metal or what, and maybe the dies that they roll it in caused it to impression into the metal. I mean, it's smooth, but it's got this weird spiral all the way down it. You can kind of see it there. All right, so polishing. This is Mother's Mag aluminum polish. And inside this little can is a powerful white magical paste that will take that somewhat polished column, and when we apply it to this column and then buff it off, that column will have a near chrome finish. I mean, it is... this stuff is incredible. So it'll probably polish that column even if we didn't wet sand. If we just dry sanded it and then applied this mag and aluminum polish, it probably would have polished it then. I've never tried that. But all you've got to do is apply it and then come back. I'm using the ShamWows, and I go down in one direction and then come back. And then do it a second time. You can definitely see those spirals now. All right, so the next stage is applying a paste wax to the column. And this is because we're at bare metal now, so that bare metal will certainly rust again. I live in Georgia, and we have 100% humidity 9 months out of the year, so I apply this to all of my columns probably about once a year. But we're just going to apply it, and any paste wax would probably work. Carbonuba or something like that is fine. You just need a wax that will give you a coating on the column. Johnson's doesn't make the paste wax anymore, which is just crazy, but after we've applied it, then we're just going to buff it off with a microfiber cloth. So here we are at the bench grinder, and I've got that wire wheel on there, and this is the spindle, and we're just cleaning up some of the spindle on it. Really, that thrust collar that's on there, that's the little threaded section that's added to it, and then the splines that are at the other end of the spindle. And everything else on that spindle will clean up in the metal lathe. This is the feed stop rod or depth gauge. And we're just going to clean it up in the wire wheel. And this is the chuck body. And we're just cleaning the large outer section on the bottom and on the top. We're not going to clean the middle section because it would rip that thing right out of our hands. These are the handles, the lock handles for the head and table. This is the chuck sleeve. And that is the chuck key. And then these are the long bolts or through bolts for the motor. There are 4 of them. This is the spacer for the spindle pulley assembly. And then these are the various lock and sleeves for the locks. And you've got the table lock and the head lock and the quill lock. And once we've cleaned all these up on the wire wheel, then we'll wipe them down and clean out the bores inside them. And these are the jaws for the chuck. And I think, yep, we're cleaning the split nut or half nut for the chuck as well. I think that's the wire retention bracket that goes on the side of the head, which is erroneously called the capacitor clip or something like that. This is the pinion. We're just going to clean up the splines on the pinion. And then this is the tension rod for the motor mount. So once we've got those parts cleaned up, we move back over to the bench, and we're going to clean out all the bores in them with some of these bore brushes. And I just use this kit that I got off of Amazon, and it has brass and steel and nylon brushes in it in various sizes. And we're cleaning these out because we had coated all of these parts with WD-40, and WD-40 will rust over time. So we want to get that WD-40 out of them, and then we're going to recoat them with a different protectant. So for the chuck, I'm going to use my Dremel and some little brass brushes to clean out the socket part of the chuck. And then back to more wire wheels. And we'll clean that chuck up much further on the lathe. So this is super slick stuff, and it is an excellent protectant. And I'm just going to hose all of these parts down. This is everything we cleaned up in the wire wheel. And then we'll flip these parts over. And hose them again. And you can get this super slick stuff off of Amazon. I get it from Ace Hardware, but I think they have it at Lowe's, maybe Home Depot, in their little lubricant section, wherever you're going to find 3-in-1 oil and WD-40 and that kind of stuff. And this is a silicone-based protectant, so it's not going to rust or anything like that. It's got a kind of a citrusy smell to it. Doesn't everything these days? So then we'll recoat everything. I'm watching this now. I don't know if I flipped over those rings in the center, but no big deal, because we're going to come back and wipe all this down with a rag. All right, so once we got all that coated, we're going to wipe everything down with a rag and then set it aside so that we got room to work on the next part. So that's going to wrap up this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in that comment section below. I'll get to them as fast as I can. In the next video, we're going to be cleaning parts probably in the metal lathe, polishing some stuff. We've got to modify the switch panel. I'm going to add a second switch to that. And we've got to clean up the various panels that have the graphics on them. And then I think we'll be ready for assembly. So we'll start with the motor and work our way up from there. So probably 3 more videos for this series. As always, I appreciate the support, and I will see you next time.